Radio Show, brought to you by People G2, a nationwide leader in background checks and employment screening solutions. People G2 gives their clients access to the best human capital management and due diligence tools available. They are dedicated to helping their clients with all of their people-related decisions. To learn more, go to www.peopleg2.com. Talent Talk centers on the topics of talent recruitment and management, leadership development, company culture, and employee engagement. These are all timely topics for CEOs, entrepreneurs, HR professionals, and business leaders. We hope that as you tune in to listen each week, whether to the live broadcast or to the podcast on iTunes or iHeartRadio, that you hear something you can take away that will help you grow and impact your career in a positive way. And now, here's the host of the Talent Talk Radio Show, the founder and CEO of People G2, Chris Dyer.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome to Talent Talk, or whatever time of the day it is that you happen to be listening to the show. Welcome, and I'm so happy you're here because I have two really fun guests who have been on the show before. Veterans of the show, veterans of podcasts and radio themselves, and it's really exciting to have them on the show to be able to talk through what's kind of new and exciting about what they're thinking about, what they're doing, and I can't wait for you to meet them in a moment. So, the show really is designed around my desire, my maybe habit, or even obsession with talking to smart people who have smart things to talk about and can expose us to new ideas, expose us to things we should be thinking about, suggest new books for us, and maybe give us some inspiration on how to get better, how to maybe make our places of employment, our employees, work in a better environment, whatever it may be, whatever we can take from them, we can steal from their really smart brains or their souls, I guess. Cool. That we can take back to work. That's really why we're here. And so many of the great stories I was able to put in my first book, The Power of Company Culture. Love to have you check that out wherever you are in the world. It's on Amazon or Bowl, or type it in. I'm sure you can find it somewhere. Talent Talk is live here just about every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We generally record it here live in Costa Mesa, California, or on the road if I'm traveling. So, but we then turn it into a podcast so that you can listen to it anytime you want, but we'd love to always record it live first and then throw it up there on iTunes, or you can even find it on talenttalkradio.com. Real important, if you have a question for one of my two guests here today, love to have you pop that into Twitter. Just find @PeopleG2. There we are live tweeting right now. Sarah, my social media guru, Sarah Blake, is actively live tweeting, and she'll be tagging the guests in those posts. So if you go there, you can follow it live, or you can even follow the hashtag Talent Talk. And that's where you can ask a question. And if you're listening live, we try to feed that into the questions. If you're listening after the fact, that's okay. My guests today are very active on Twitter, and they'd be happy to answer the question at any time. So now that I've teased you as much as I possibly can with who's on the show today, let's get to that. My first guest live in studio will be Dr. Dina Brown, Executive Director of the John Maxwell team, as well as an outstanding speaker on leadership. And then I'll bring in another guest to the studio, Kathy Hammond, who's been on, like I said before. She's now the CEO of SalesFit Staffing Solutions, a little bit of a different job for her than what she was doing last time she was in here. So we're looking forward to catching up with her after the commercial break. But let's go ahead and get moving here with my first guest. Dr. Dina Brown, welcome.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So lovely to be here. It's always a pleasure to see you. So thank you for having me as a guest.
Always. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself? What should we know about you that's important for us to know? Like, I don't think we need to know what you got for your birthday present on your third birthday, but what's important for us to know about you today? And of course, what are you doing now as the executive director for the John Maxwell team?
Well, what's important to know about me is that everything that I learned about being a phenomenal leader and a speaker, I learned from being Xavier's mom. And I love to share that because he really taught me about patience. He taught me about just a sense of abundance and leader and forgiveness and all of that. And I was able to roll that into my leadership style. And what I'm able to do now is to take that and be able to help leaders lead with confidence and be able to communicate with influence and collaborate strategically so they can realize their optimal goals and their business objectives.
Well, it's really interesting that you brought up your son in there, because I will say that I often tested some of the things that I would learn on my kids first, and if I could find, if it worked on teenagers,
Right.
it seemed to work in the workplace as well, right? Especially with your sometimes more difficult personalities.
Yes.
So you're also a professional speaker, and what are some of the topics that you're really passionate about and love to speak on?
I love to speak about transformational leadership as a whole. And with that, being a transformational leader requires you to also be quite authentic in your leadership. And so to me, those two go hand in hand. And when we begin to show up in our authentic space, then we now have the opportunity to have not only intentional results, but impact, positive impact in our workspaces.
So I've been exposed to this a few talks, let's say, in the last in my travels in the last 3 or 4 months. And I've heard of, I would say, I've run the gamut on this idea of being your authentic self,
Yes.
right? And I've heard some people when they spoke, I'm like, I get it, you make sense, what you're saying is right. And then some other people when they spoke, it was like, this just sounds like an excuse for you to keep being the jerk that you want to be, because they're just saying, well, I'm just being my authentic self. I'm just being me, and I'm going to go around being a jerk to everybody because they just believe that they're just a jerk at heart or whatever, right? So how does someone peel back this onion to try to really be the authentic you without it being like, I guess, railroading over somebody else?
I'm so glad you asked that question because you're absolutely right, which is why I'm so passionate about what authenticity really actually means. And here's what I actually share when I go in a space in a room is that I love me, and if you do, it's a bonus. Now, here's the part. I've had to go do some work and pull back a lot of those layers and see that what is it that I may be doing that is not really aligned to who I was initially called to be. Not just because I'm a butthole and I want to show up in that particular space and I just want to act out with people. And that when people are mean to people, it's because they don't love who they are. And that's where you see this disconnect, because you can't even love yourself if you don't even know who you are. So you do have to kind of get quiet and begin to focus on that and realize that, who am I called to be? I am called to inspire, empower, and transform lives. And so when I make decisions and when I begin to show up and I get to lead and I get to interact with people, and I always ask, how am I adding value? And so for me to be authentic in my value add space is that I think of people first. But I cannot really think of people first if I don't even know who I am and I'm so caught in this whole miserable space. So I think that is totally a wash when people say I'm being authentic and I'm being mean to people. Well, all it means is that you're probably a butthole. That's probably what that means. It doesn't mean that you're an authentic leader. And if you are called to lead, do you lead your children that way? Do you lead your family that way? And guess what? 9 times out of 10, go check their home life. And they are. And they're really just miserable people masquerading as leaders.
Yeah. And I know even if you can get past, let's say, that group, then the second group I think that struggles is they show up to be authentic, and maybe now they're just trying to be too much to everybody, right? So you're talking about being there for everyone, right? And I think this is an area that's really hard to do. I struggle with a little bit that, you can be there for everyone. You can be there for your employees, be there for your family, be there for your friends. And then at the end of the day go, but is anyone here for me?
Wow.
Right. And how do you filter in that I need some of that help too, and be able to tell people that in an authentic way without, do you know what I mean? I feel like every day is like this.
Yeah, but you do. You're 100% right, but it's setting boundaries. It really is. But again, first, I was just having a conversation before coming in today with a client. We were talking about, do we actually use our dreams and what we really want as a plan B? Or do we have relentless pursuit of what we're passionate about, what we're called to do? And do we truly love ourselves first? Because when you start to make choices about loving yourself first and identifying what it is that you need and you being what you need first, and this even works with your children. Like I said, I piloted this with my son, is that, yes, I'll make sure that you're fed and you're healthy, you're all of that, but I also need me time to work on me, I owe that to me. And so I give it to myself first, so I don't expect it from anybody else. If they do give it to me, it's a bonus. And so when I started intentionally operating from that space, that's where the shift began to occur. And so I didn't feel like, wow, they just disappointed me. Well, you know what? You've been disappointing you. That's the problem. So why don't you start showing up for you first and watch other people begin to follow, because now you've set the model. And that's what leaders do, is
Right.
that they set that tone.
And then sort of the last area where I started, I guess, for lack of a better description, hitting my head up against the wall a little bit when it comes around this idea, or at least the ideas that people were throwing out there about being your authentic self,
Right.
is at what point, or maybe you don't think this, but I started to see some rub between being your authentic self, quote, I'm giving air quotes out there
Right.
for everyone who can't see me, and privilege. And whatever that means to whoever, right? I'm not putting a label on that word, but you have a privilege to be in that position, whatever that means. And do you think it's easier for someone who's in that leadership position, right, who got there however they got there, that was different than somebody else who didn't have the same access to get to that place? Is it easier for them to walk around and say they're being authentic and all of this, right? They have this sort of, I don't know if it's a gift or sort of a pass to suddenly walk around and act like they're authentic, but it's harder for someone else who's struggling just to get to get the same opportunities that someone else had in that position. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and it makes sense for a couple of reasons. One, I just watched the Netflix special Hello, Privilege is Me, Chelsea. And then I also watched the Red Table Talk special that Jada Pinkett Smith did with Chelsea Handler as well. And in watching that and understanding that and working in this diverse and selectively inclusive environment, I do see that. But at the root of it all is a lack of clarity, to be honest with you. And that we're talking about privilege, really what it is for some people is really their scripts. They don't know anything else. Until you make the unconscious conscious, then you don't. So them showing up that is their authentic self as they know it. That is their truth. But what we have is the juxtaposition when your truth intersects with mine, and now that there's this friction that goes there, which then goes back to who are you? Do you spend that time asking yourself the hard questions? I can agree to disagree with people sometimes,
Right.
and to do that as well. So did I get to this position and am I entitled? I think that entitlement piece comes into play. And I saw that as a veteran educator and being a school principal. And I had certain people of certain titles and certain stature and certain children who were senior leaders came in and said, well, my child needs to do this because I am Colonel so-and-so. And for me, I just made a decision that whether you were Colonel so-and-so or corn on the cob or corn kernel, you were going to get the same treatment. But that was part of my decision and part of my truth. And again, every person has to answer to himself. So I just kind of start working around that and understanding that, and even working with leaders to start to see that, because it's like a blinder that they have, because that's all they've known.
Right. Right.
And I think that's kind of, I don't know if that answers your question
No,
in the way that you
yeah, it
meant,
does.
but it really does, because people are really speaking their truth and their understanding, which is why I have to be very clear and confident and consistent about the way I show up and how I speak mine.
I think maybe the rub for me with some of those talks was it seemed very easy for that person to show up and say, you should be authentic because I'm authentic. And it's like, yeah, but and I'm not trying to be disparaging or tear that person down in any way, but it's easier for you, that person who was
Yes.
talking, to be in that position than it is that's just randomly pick somebody else in the room.
Yeah.
And so they're sort of like it's like walking around telling everyone you should be happy, right? If you're in a room full of people who had terrible childhoods, and then you walk in and have the best childhood ever, and you're like, you should just be happy, right? And just get over it. And right, so there's a sort of missing
It's the
context.
frame. Yeah, you're right. It's the framework. It really is. It's the lens that you look through. And I'm 100% in agreement with you when you say that it's easy for them to think that, okay, this is privilege. Yes, I can be authentic. But then that goes back to their scripts. What's their story? What's the understanding? That is the life that they know. So what if that was your life? Then you would be doing the same thing. That's why I said that's their truth.
Sure.
And so it's that intersection, and now we can start to talk about it, and we can see where the rub is, and now you can understand me a little bit better and go, oh, okay, well, you don't get that part, and I got it because you didn't live that life.
Right. So this would be kind of a good segue if we sort of take some of these ideas and maybe we look deeper into companies, and especially around a culturally inclusive workplace, especially in a workplace that has just so many different generations, and pretty soon maybe actually a little bit less. We may sort of become very top heavy in the millennial area here in about 2025 if all the studies turn out to be right before we then have another big hit and everyone complains about the next generation. But what does it look like? What is an ideal workplace with sort of the right inclusion and the right generational type things look like for you?
What that looks like for me is that voices are heard and people are understanding and having open communication around who they actually are. It doesn't mean that every single person is going to get exactly what they want. But can we be open to the idea to think differently and out of the box, to making sure that we can address and meet the needs and then have a conscious conversation about what's best and how does that tie into our mission, vision, and values as an organization? Because those decisions have to be made as well. Is that just because I say I'm authentic, well, you might be so authentic that you don't really fit here. And that's okay. You might have a certain ideology that doesn't fit here. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that it doesn't fit. So culturally inclusiveness doesn't mean that we have to take everybody to be there, because we still have an overall mission, vision, and values as an organization, or you should have that. And now you can begin to see what aligns to that. And even where there might be some cognitive dissonance to that. You don't want everybody thinking the same either.
Right.
Innovation comes from that friction.
Absolutely.
And so you do want to do that. So that sense of awareness about who people actually are, how they show up. I'm a fan of DISC and really kind of doing those assessments to see how we communicate. How do we respond? Do we react more? What happens? And who do I need to work with? I'm an ID on a DISC and pretty very close to the two. So guess what I need on my team? I need some of those S's and those C's, to do that. But are we building environments that look exactly like us and then wondering why we're stagnant?
Right.
Because you didn't provide any friction. You didn't provide anything that was different. So cultural inclusiveness is having really diverse thinkers, taking the best of each group, each age group, each generational group, each whatever, and saying, what is it that you have which is your value add?
Right.
And how can we implement that and include that as part of our overall objective?
So we recently did a webinar, and anyone who's listening can find it at peopleg2.com/webinars. It was on diversity, but it was on diversity of thought.
Yes.
Right. And so how can we think about diversity in a way that's really, I think, practical? I think this is one of the challenges for senior leaders is, can they practically do something?
Yes.
Without it just being go hire more of X or more of Y or
Right.
whatever, right? Which is just recipe for disaster, right? 'Cause it just backfires. And so we talked about we also talked about strengths finders.
Yes.
And so one of this is like the best thing we ever did, and I admit this every time, it was on total accident, right? We did not do this on purpose. We are not this smart. We just found this out on accident, which is we mapped all of our strengths. Because I just wanted to see where are we strong and where are we strong in each, different teams. Like my research team, every single one of them had responsibility in their top 5, which we was like, that's fascinating, right? That's kind of a good indicator that you might be good at that job if you have that as a strength. It kind of goes hand in hand. So, then I said, but we have all these strengths that we're missing, right? That we had not a single person with analytical, not a single person with belief or whatever. I'm just sort of throwing out some of these strengths. And so I told my managers, I will not even consider someone hiring your next person if they don't have at least one strength in one of the areas we have nothing in.
Yes.
That was it. Because I just wanted to see what would happen if we got some people who had some different strengths. Well, much to my surprise, again, this was a total accident, the people showing up for these interviews looked different, talked different, acted different, and I never told anyone, we're going to have a diversity and inclusion program. We're going to I didn't say, I just said I want us to hire people who think differently than what we have now, so we could get stronger, so we could get better. And it was like, oh, wow, we just did something without trying to do something, right? And so we've been talking about this with a lot of our clients and people, and they've been having the same kind of effect, right? And I don't know how sustainable this is for, maybe larger organizations have to do this by departments and all this, right? But for us, it worked really, really well. So
it's an intentionality. What I love about what you shared is that it's part of the culture. And you said, here, let's have this conversation. Here's some data that supports this. Here's what our expectations are. And so even though you said, well, it's kind of, we sort of didn't know, it really was an intentionality. But that's a tribute to your leadership.
Yeah.
And to say we need to have people that think different. And so you set the tone. You set the voice. And that's part of the challenge in leadership spaces now is that the leader, they're saying one thing and doing something else. What would happen if their audio and video match like yours, that those people become attracted to you. Those that you're charged to lead will follow that, and you will bring in who you need to elevate your organization.
And I think this is probably maybe one out of 2 total things that I do well. Everything else, everyone else at the company does well. I just follow them. But it's being open to just to try things,
Right.
and then see what happens, right? And so we just keep experimenting, and we keep 9 out of 10 experiments are just experiments, and they fall and they die and they never come back. But every once in a while, we just kind of stumble across these cool things because we're willing to try something new. We're willing to, poke at something or try something different. And I think that's, I don't know if it's just curiosity or it's
You're fostering innovation.
Yeah.
No, that's what you're doing. I study from a behavioral analysis. This is me, it gets in my nerd space, is that what you're doing is actually very powerful because you're now fostering that ability to take those risks, to think differently, to be culturally inclusive, to say, go out there and try it. If it didn't work, we're going to come and do something different.
Right.
We can always go back and rework that. So you're doing that, and you're showing up, and you're practicing. So you're affirming, and you have the action steps to go with it.
Right, which works. Well, I can't believe it. We're almost out of time here. I want to make sure we ask you 2 very important questions. Okay. The first one is, what are you reading right now?
I am reading John Maxwell's Leadership. I really love this. It's the 11 essential changes every leader must embrace. It's one of the most powerful ones of all his leadership books because it really talks about what we need to do now to be able to impact that. And one of the quotes, which is my favorite, is people may honor you for what you did yesterday, but they respect you for what you're doing now. So what shifts are you going to make to own up to what you're doing right now?
That's great. And then, of course, the most important question is how can people get a hold of you? How can they find out more about you? If they want to work with you, they want to talk with you, they want to, hang out with you, whatever. What's the best way for them to find out more?
You can definitely follow me on all social media platforms at Dr. Deena Speaks, DrDeena Speaks. And you can reach out to me at info@DrDeena Speaks if you are looking for a transformational leader and speaker who can really begin to speak life into your group and help you as a leader lead with confidence, communicate with influence, and collaborate strategically.
Well, that was very well said. So I'm sure they can find you on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook.
Absolutely.
How about MySpace? Are you on MySpace?
Oh, no. I made the shift.
You made the shift. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you coming on. I know that we'll have you come back because you're always a great guest and give us such great things to think about. So love to have you come back soon.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Chris. I love the work that you're doing.
All right, we'll be right back after this quick commercial break, and we'll bring in Kathy Hammond.
Imagine buying a newspaper and discovering that the news you're reading is 6 months old. There isn't much that stays the same for 6 months, and the same thing goes for background checks. In a time when so much outdated information is being passed around, it's good to know that People G2 offers something different. At People G2, we provide today's intelligence, not yesterday's news. Our value-added approach offers you a fully FCRA-compliant solution that includes up-to-the-minute information. By combining industry-leading technology with old-school human investigation, People G2 is able to give you information that is accurate right now, delivered quickly through our online system, or integrated with your HR system. So ask yourself, are you comfortable working with old news, or are you ready for a different kind of background check company? Visit peopleg2.com or call 800-630-2880. That's 800-630-2880 or peopleg2.com.
Imagine what it would feel like to lose everything. Your job, your home, your family, your dignity. This has happened to thousands of the men, women, veterans, and young adults we serve at Working Wardrobes. What do we do to help? We provide career development services, life skills workshops, job skills training. We provide the perfect interview outfit, and we get clients placed in jobs. Call Working Wardrobes, 714-210-2460. Donate, volunteer, invest, hire.
Welcome back to the Talent Talk Radio Show. In case you missed my first guest, Dr. Deena Brown, you can listen to her interview on the podcast on iTunes or talenttalkradio.com. So it's a good idea to go and subscribe there right now. And then when that show is ready, when we've done all the editing and removing all the ums and, making it sound perfect, it will be up there before you know it. So, but I'm excited to have my second guest back in the studio again, Kathy Hammond, the CEO of SalesFit Staffing Solutions, which is a different company than what she was with before. So excited to find out more about that. And don't forget, as a reminder, we'd love to have you go to Twitter. Follow at PeopleG2. And there, Sarah, my social media guru, is live tweeting all of the best little one-liners, and you can follow them, like them, retweet them, comment on them, tell us what we're right, tell us why we're wrong, whatever. We just want to hear from you. So, but Kathy, welcome to the show.
Great. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back.
So why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, what's important for us to know, and then tell us about your new gig.
Okay. Well, I've started a new company, SalesFit Staffing Solutions. I'm also deploying a new platform under another name, Recruit Salute. SalesFit Staffing, of course, is for recruiting sales professionals for the workforce solutions industry. Recruit Salute, on the other hand, for that platform is to actually bring together recruiting agencies and employers. So essentially cutting out the salesperson in effect. So I'm really excited about both of these new ventures.
How are you keeping, you have two ventures you're juggling at the same time? Is that fun, or is that a challenge, or?
Now, it's a challenge, yes, but at the same time, it is a lot of fun. And so it's really not work, it's building something great for everyone that's involved in it. So that's what keeps me going with that.
That's great. Well, so you talked about you're developing this online platform, which was my understanding will match employers to recruiting agencies to kind of help them expedite the job placements, right?
Yes.
Okay. So talk about, this and maybe what impact you're hoping it's going to have on companies to help them hire and fill their positions faster or better. What's really what problem are you trying to, solve or to help them with?
The challenge for companies looking to hire people and working through recruiters is often finding the right recruiter, people that actually know about that particular role so that they can quickly, as well as also have a database of their candidates that they can present to them. And so that they also know how to vet them. They have the tools in place,
right.
Things like selection tests and, the correct, interview questions, things of that nature to really be able to help expedite the process. Of course, time to hire is critical for employers, but they're reluctant to hire because they're not sure if really the right person has come along. Whereas you have recruiting agencies that do specialize in their particular field, and that they can really move the candidates through the pipeline that much more quickly. So it solves that problem for the hiring company.
And I also usually have the opposite problem with time to hire. I'm ready to hire. If they get me the right person, we'll grab them in a heartbeat. But it sometimes will take recruiters too much time, I think, to figure us out, right? To figure out what it is we're really looking for, even though we've told them up front. Really figure out what is the right candidate's experience or way they're going to work, as far as their personality goes, to fit into our organization, those types of things. And it seems like it takes sometimes 3 months to get them even in the right ballpark, and another 2 months to even start finding in those great candidates that we can consider. Is that atypical, or is it more that people are just, they're not sure, and so they're just, they're dragging their feet on really good candidates?
For the hiring companies, some of them are dragging their feet simply because it's not a one-person decision in most cases. So, one person may think that's a great candidate, maybe 2 or 3 other people, they're not sure, they want to see more people. And it's always the see more. Let me see more and more of the candidates. There's no perfection in anything, but really what you're looking for are people who can actually do the job.
Right.
And that's what it really is all about when you're hiring someone. So do the job. If they can do the job, they've proven they can do the job, why not pull the trigger?
And I agree with you. If you can get over that part, if you can prove that they can do the job, whether that's through experience or some bit of test or something you can have them do, or some experience you can put them through with you to see that, you really should just move. I mean, it's almost like, I've gone shopping with people and they pick up the very first thing and they like it. And then they walk around for 2 hours looking at everything else and end up with the thing they looked at first, right? And it's like, you could have just bought the first thing and saved us 2 hours. We could have had a corn dog and a lemonade and gotten out of here, right?
Exactly, right. Yeah. And that's where the specialized recruiting agencies, that's where they shine, because they can present you. They don't need to present, 30 candidates to you. They can present 2 to 3 maximum, because they've already done all that vetting. They already know what the right person looks like for your organization, because they asked you the right questions at the start.
Right. So you kind of mentioned that time to hire was a very key metric. Is there any other key metrics that employers should be thinking about?
Yes, time to productivity. And so, if you're taking a lot of time to be able to get somebody on board, what you have to do is be able to get them to become productive in a short amount of time to really shorten that ROI on the recruiting process and all of that. And so if you're able to reduce that time to productivity by even 1/10, you could cover a lot of the costs in recruiting that individual, or the training costs, so you're really recouping that if you're really also focusing at time to productivity. And where you can shorten that time to productivity is in hiring people who have proven to be able to do the job in the first place.
Well, and that's a big one. And I don't know if, sometimes people have that slow, that time to productivity. Is that part of the internal, they have a big company and they've got to figure things out. Is it a lack of tools? I mean, I still run into companies that have people start and they don't even have, their computer ready. They don't have their email set up. They don't have any of the basic things they need to even just begin to do their jobs, right? And you can imagine hiring someone like a VP of marketing, VP of sales or something. And then if the organization hasn't taken the time to give everything that person needs to really be successful, whether it's the training, the access, the right connections, all that, how could they possibly ever do their job well? And they're going to sit around for 6 months trying to fight and get that stuff for them.
Exactly. And this is also where internal talent acquisition folks and HR can really help with that process.
Right.
Develop a checklist of all the things that new hire is going to need in advance of the job. Order their business cards, get the company car if that's involved in that. Get laptops, computers, their workstations, get everything set up for them so that you can, again, shorten that time to productivity. I mean, I worked for a very large corporation many years ago. And when I showed up on my first day of work, the hiring manager wasn't there. HR was in another city, so they weren't able to help me. The receptionist had no idea where I was supposed to go, and so I sat around for several hours doing nothing. When the hiring manager finally showed up, unapologetically, said, well, let's see if we can find somewhere to put you. And then it took another 6 weeks to get my laptop. Wow. Before I could do anything.
Wow.
And I couldn't even do any of the training because I had to be able to log in to the system onto the laptop. So that was just lost money for them and for me, because I'm in sales.
Right. So they might have sent you on a 6-week vacation,
absolutely,
or
right.
even a training, gone to like out of the office training, something, right? Other than having you sit there.
Or order the laptop.
Order the laptop. Well, listen, I can't fix everything.
But I like the vacation idea.
Yeah. I mean, I've told people, if you are not ready for them on day one, tell them to take the day. Tell them, I'm sorry, we didn't get everything ready. Come in tomorrow. Why make them come in and do all this stuff and be frustrated? They'd be far more appreciative to you to say, I know we said come in on Monday. We didn't get it done. Come in on Tuesday or come in on Wednesday. They'd be just, even if you're going to pay them, we'll pay you. Just, there's no reason to come here and get frustrated and have everybody upset. And, people know within the first few moments, in the first few hours, whether or not they're going to last another week or another month, or they're, going to start their job search again, just by what happens right away. And that's...
Oh, of course. Yeah. The onboarding process is so important. But in sales, it's also really important for, if you bring a new sales rep into the organization, make sure that you have all your meetings set up with key accounts, with the contacts there, to really start integrating them. Because as soon as you can get them in front of those customers, the sooner they can start solving problems for that customer to start making more sales. So it's not just just about wasting time and money on their wages during that period of time, but also what are the lost opportunities to the company. Also, too, if you've got a transition of salespeople and no one is doing much with them and it's taking a while to get in to see those customers, you could be losing opportunities to your competitors as well.
So one of the things I was interested in asking you is, as you have a good understanding of this space, is at some point our economy will shift. History tells us we will have our ups and downs, and whether that's tomorrow or next year or 5 years from now or 20, whatever that time happens, I think there's going to be a shift. And right now we have such low unemployment that part of the problem I see in our growth strategy with our clients is that they have open recs they can't fill, and if they can't fill them, they can't run background checks. So we can't, they're not running as many as they could because they don't have the talent to fill those positions. But if there is a bit of a dip at some point, will there become more positions, and will the dip create a rise again, or will it just be a dip and a big correction? And how does that impact recruiters? So I'm not asking you to give us a crystal ball from an economic standpoint, but when and if that happens, how do you feel like that it impacts recruiters in relation to what's happening right now?
Well, it really starts with the hiring companies. They have to really look at, who are their top performers, because if the economy does retract, and so that they may have to just let some people go, as we went through the last recession. So it's really identifying who are your top performers. If there are any gaps to fill, start looking for those people now, because you're going to you have that time to hire and the time to productivity. So even if you're talking 6 months out, and some are predicting mid 2020, perhaps a recession, which would mean that you'd have to really start your search now if you had some openings, or if you're going to have to get some of underperforming employees, you need to get them in the pipeline now and start interviewing in order for them to be productive by the time a recession hits. Because if you bring in a new salesperson, for example, during a time when the recession is starting, or where there's a retraction in the economy, you're going to have that person not being able to be up to speed. They don't have the momentum to be able to carry them through that period of time. So that's what's important now, really being able to give them the opportunity of having momentum.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. And really being able to identify who that talent is, who's the right people you need to keep, how will you, I saw a lot of companies just make the strategy, we're just going to cut X, right? And they did it with a pair of dull scissors.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Instead of a very sharp sword, right? And really suffered for it, and really didn't come back as quickly as they could have when things started changing, because they had done, really their recession management so poorly.
Well, yeah, and they cut the wrong people sometimes, because if you're not giving someone enough time to be able to get up to speed quickly because they don't have all the tools that they need, and that person ends up leaving when this could have been your star employee. So, I mean, people need time to be able to become productive.
Right. I wanted to ask you about vetting salespeople, because sometimes they can be the easiest to see if they're performing and producing, and to make a decision on. And they can also be the most difficult sometimes. I think there's sort of this. They can do a very good job of having this huge pipeline and all these potential opportunities, and maybe not ever closing. And so, and also the organization itself might not be providing the support and the tools and things that someone needs to be successful, and they're such an important part of an organization. What do you see as really sort of those big determinants around, whether or not someone is going to do a good job, is doing a good job, and how do you really uncover some of that?
I read a book that was written by Herb, I think Greenberg from Caliper. He was, I think, the founder of Caliper. Caliper is a selection testing company.
Okay.
And it was really interesting because they said that 80% of people in sales should not be in sales. Of the remaining 20%, 80% are selling the wrong thing. So people look at someone who has been successful in one area of sales and think that they can just automatically transition over to another area. And that's not the case. I mean, you see like the door knockers that go around selling everything from pest control to alarm systems out there. That's a skill set. That's a very specific skill set.
Right.
I couldn't do it. And, the same thing with like automotive sales, one-off sales versus being able to build relationships with Fortune 500 companies. Everyone has their sweet spot if they're a sales professional. But a lot of people approach a sales profession as this is something to fall back on if my other plans don't work in my career. But sales is a profession just like medicine and law and everything else. And so it's really identifying what are the specific competencies, required of that particular sales role. Everything is not equal with salespeople. So in being able to vet them, you have to first identify what competencies are required of that particular position. And what are what are we selling also? Is it a tangible and intangible? And being able to break it down that way. And then from that, once you have that, then you're able to actually test them on their ability to do that. Another way too, in being able to identify great salespeople is ask them what their accomplishments have been. And then ask them how they achieved it. I mean, any salesperson worth their salt, they want to tell you all of their success stories. And those that cannot articulate that, these are people that really do not understand the sales process.
Yeah. And then that we can certainly have salespeople we bring in, and you might lose them. They certainly have, I think, the highest turnover rate of any group I've seen historically. Why do you think this is?
Because of the expectations. I'm sure there's been, some people have been fibbed to by hiring managers, about, what the situation really is. And then you get in on the other side and you find out that that's really not the case. The company needs to be brutally honest about what the circumstances are. One of my best jobs that I ever had in sales and just with great people and everything else was I had the hiring manager during the interview tell me how horrible everything was. And just what the company, had gone through and what they were trying to resolve and all these things. I mean, it was just like anyone that, you think, gosh, anybody with sense wouldn't take this job. But it turned out to just be one of my favorite jobs, and because I knew what I was getting into and I knew how I could help.
Right.
So that was really important. The other thing, too, is, making sure that it's a sales-oriented culture. Surprisingly, I mean, companies can't survive without sales. And yet, surprisingly, you have staff members in there that are undermining salespeople's efforts, for whatever reason. And so a company can't survive very well, operating like that.
Well, and a lot of people would be surprised to hear that, but I will tell you that you can be a customer service focused organization, and that's different than being a sales focused organization. Yeah. And when you get into internal things inside the company, if you're customer service focused first, you can start to say, well, we can't take that account on, we can't do that thing because we can't possibly ever service it. We can't possibly ever get our 10 out of 10 on our, feedback score because everyone's and it's not a bad thing to have that conversation, but you have to be really clear about which one is it. Are we growing? Are we maintaining, right? Well, what is our main focus here? And for some organizations, they can be customer service focused because they have some other engine or some other thing happening. I think Zappos is a good example of that, right? They have a product and service that they are offering that can go, and then there people can be customer service focused, right? A service organization like me, we have to make a clear choice about which way we're going, right? Or because you can't juggle both at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there'll be some conflicts in the process.
Yeah.
So in that case, maybe sales then becomes account management, more than where you're looking for organic growth. People aren't cold calling. You're really just making sure everybody is happy and growing what you already have.
So if we want to sort of make sure that we don't have high turnover, well, I guess whether it's in a salesperson or it's expanded beyond that, and we also want to identify great salespeople, what's sort of the mechanisms here? I mean, we've talked a little bit about being very clear about what the job is, being clear with the expectations, making sure people have the tools and things that they need. I would throw in, I think, certainly some good vetting, making sure they really have done the things they said they've done. What else are we missing here in the process? The
selection testing is huge. A validated test specific for that role is, is really invaluable, because there's really nowhere to hide, for the candidate to hide. Also, in being able to get references to really understand, to ask different questions, not just how do you think this person was, performing, because a lot of the references that people furnish are not, they weren't really involved in the daily activities with that person.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes references are people about their character, right? And you can have someone who's the nicest person, who's the great, you would want to hang out and go have a beer with them anytime, but they're a crappy salesperson.
Exactly. So it really, like in sales, because the company is also selling itself to the candidate, it's asking the right questions, and then having them back it up with examples on everything that they're doing. So, and that's even of their references. So you can ask that question. Yeah, again, character. Yes, that's certainly important. But you can ask them specific questions like, what do you know about how this particular account was brought into the company?
Right.
And if they have no information about it, okay, well then you can discount, like anything that they may be saying in terms of, how great they think this person is in sales, because you're really looking for somebody who can, to give them some real insight from the point of view of, from management, customer service, finance. I mean, all of those different areas. So, but no, ask questions, ask the right questions, test them, and make sure that they can articulate how they actually achieved what they achieved.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you already mentioned one great book, but are you reading a new one now that you might share with us?
I am. I actually just started a book by Dr. Edith Eger. She wrote The Choice, Embrace the Possible. So I just started this. She's a Holocaust survivor, and she's a practicing psychotherapist, I think, here in La Jolla. And she was talking about how her mother gave her some great words of wisdom as they were hauling her mother off to the gas chambers. And she said, no one can take away from you what you put in your mind. And so that just kind of resonated with me, because this woman, she's 92 now. She wrote the book when she was 91. Wow. So yeah, embrace the possible.
Wow. I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
If you get 91, he'd be like, I think I love that kind of spirit that someone thinks they start a project like that at 91 and says, I'm going to be around when this is done. I'm going to keep writing. I'm going to be here. That kind of, most people I meet at 91 aren't thinking that way. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I just wrote a blog post about this, actually, about her experience. Yeah. So when she was on the death march, she had, a few months before that, Dr. Mengele, the angel of death, he had asked her to dance for him. And when she was done, he gave her a loaf of bread. And even though she was hungry, she went back to her barracks and she shared the bread with the other women there. She didn't realize, she was just being who she was. A few months later, she had a broken back. She was suffering from all these illnesses. She's on the death march. She struggled to walk, and the women formed a chair with their hands, and they carried her the rest of the way. Wow. And she said, in cooperation, you can achieve the goals, not in competition.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I'm sure people would love to check that blog post out. How can they find out more about you? Where can they find that? What's the best way for them to find out more about everything you're doing?
Sure. Yes. You can look up Sales Fit Staffing on LinkedIn. And I put the blog post there as well, and also in general LinkedIn. And the web address is salesfitstaffing.com. And my phone number, 888-417-6057.
Well, I'm sure people would love to connect with you and read that blog post. It sounds really interesting. I guess the final thing, if someone only heard you say one thing today, if they somehow weren't paying attention for most of it, and they only heard one thing, what's the one thing you hope they might take away with them from today's conversation? Ask the right questions. I think that's perfect. That's perfect. Well, Kathy, thank you so much for coming back and being on the show again today. Really enjoyed everything that we talked about, and really appreciate you giving everyone so many great things to think about.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for being a part of the show. Hopefully you've learned something you can take away and use your own career in a positive way. And it looks like maybe next week I won't be having a live show. I'm not sure why, but apparently that's what it says. So maybe I'm traveling. Anyways, until then, do what you love and show the world how talented you can be today.
You've been listening to Talent Talk Radio, brought to you by People G2.